Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves.
President Biden arguing the lack of resistance from the Afghan military is evidence that the withdrawal of U.S. troops from the nation was the right move. While Afghan security forces folded quickly in the final days of the Taliban's push to reclaim the country, that doesn't paint a full picture of our Afghan allies. Research by Brown University estimates that at least 69,000 members of the Afghan military died in combat since the U.S. invasion. That's 30 times the number of U.S. servicemen who died over the same period of time. So what should we make of Biden's statement? Joining me now is Heritage Foundation Vice President James Carafano, who's also a veteran. Jim, good to see you, my friend. It sure sounds like the president is laying the blame for this debacle largely at the feet of the Afghan security forces for lacking will to fight. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the president made a double blunder. First of all, he made a terrible strategic decision. He had a real strategy problem. And then he layered on top of that a real political problem because his speech was basically a defense of his decision making. And so he made it all about him and his decision. And the problem in doing that is everything he said is demonstrably false. The reason why the Afghan lost political will and the military disintegrated was because the US left. As long as the US was there, the Afghans would continue fighting because they knew that the American presence was the ultimate deterrent against the Taliban ever really threatening them. And we always had their back. And Americans weren't fighting and dying. As you all know, Americans didn't take a casualty in a year and a half. We were spending less in Afghanistan in a year than we used to spend in a week. As a matter of fact, Biden will probably spend 10 or 20 times more to get everybody out of Afghanistan than we spent staying there. So his painting of a thing as Americans were fighting in the middle of an unwinnable civil war, that's just a false narrative. And the problem for the president is it's clearly a demonstrable false narrative. And by saying that, he not only faces a problem that he can't solve, he's now created a political credibility problem that he can't solve. It would be as if FDR had made the Day of Infamy speech all about how Pearl Harbor was not his fault. You know, if he'd done that, he probably would have got impeached. Instead, he said, this is a great defeat and we're going to go forward and we're going to revenge it. And Biden said, this is a great defeat, but it's not my fault. And I'm going to do nothing to protect America's interests. He has really dug a hole for himself.
Jim, I just want to know what you think of the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, today saying that, I mean, he made this case when they were doing the White House press conference right before Jen Psaki came back from vacation, took over, and he was, Sullivan's case to the American people was that the Taliban was already on the rise, on the move, and that in order to prevent a major escalation of U.S. troops to meet the enhanced Taliban posture and control in the country, essentially to deal with the oncoming Taliban onslaught was going to take more U.S. troops, or we're going to have to actually do real frontline fighting again. Do you find that credible? Because that was clearly the case the National Security Advisor is trying to make today.
Yeah, except we were there for 20 years, and the Taliban never mounted that kind of effort. And clearly under Trump, when the US was actually drawing down and the Taliban got aggressive and Trump whacked the heck out of them, they backed off. So I find not only his statement unpersuasive, I actually think it's actually a different explanation than the president gave just the day before.
Yes.
So it just sounds like they're scrambling for cover. And look, here's the big problem.
Now,
I don't think a lot of people, but the big problem a lot of people really haven't talked about is these are not rookie mistakes, right? This is not Jimmy Carter coming to town with a bunch of inexperienced people kind of screwing things up, or, Kennedy falling into the Bay of Pigs. This is an experienced team. Everybody on his team was around for 8 years under Obama. They went through a number of crises, Iraq and ISIS, Syria and the Red Line, Benghazi and Libya. This is a really experienced team making really, really, really amateur mistakes. That ought to scare the heck out of people.
Now, why do you think that is? I mean, what was the thinking on this, where they would make it seemed like at a minimum, Biden and his team would understand the optics of people scrambling onto the runways at Kabul airport, people gripping onto the landing gears of C-17s and even falling to their deaths because they're so desperate to try to escape Afghanistan. I mean, to say this looks bad is a dramatic understatement. How did they mess this up so badly, Jim? I just got to pose that to you.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. I just think they're a fundamentally bad team, and they're just not very good at running stuff. I think the Biden assumption was, I am gifting Afghanistan to the Taliban. Certainly the Taliban are going to allow me to walk away before they take over the country. And then once they take over the country, I'll just say, oh, well, we weren't there. It's not our problem. That was ludicrous. Of course, the Taliban were going to humiliate the United States going out the door. But here's the deal. They had no plan for that. There was no plan A, let alone a plan B. Obama walked away from Iraq when it was at peace, and everybody said bad things could happen. There was no plan to deal with that. He put a red line out in Syria, and Assad crossed it. There was no plan to deal with that. They overthrew the government of Libya and led from behind. And they said, well, chaos could erupt in the country. There was no plan for that. They make the same mistakes over and over and over again. So what else can you assume? They're just bad at this stuff.